The stars were silent, endless points of light scattered across the void. For many civilizations, the night sky brought peace and wonder, but for the Talari it was a reminder of how small and weak they truly were. On their dying world, a voice trembled as it carried across subspace channels. A broadcast, raw with fear and despair, called out into the darkness. Please, if anyone can hear us, we beg for aid. Our defenses are broken. Our people are dying. We cannot last another cycle. It was the voice of High Speaker Veril, the chosen representative of the Talari. His face, pale and worn, appeared on every screen within the crumbling shelters. Behind him, the muffled roar of explosions and the distant shriek of collapsing towers could be heard. Even as he spoke, the ground shook with the thunder of orbital strikes. The enemy was merciless. Known only as the Krillok, they had swept across system after system like a plague. Their fleets were vast, their weapons brutal, their cruelty legendary. To the Talari they had seemed unstoppable. No negotiation, no mercy, only fire and ruin. Children huddled in basements, mothers held them close, whispering promises of safety that they no longer believed. Soldiers stood at half-ruined barricades, their rifles trembling in weary hands. Every corner of their world carried the same feeling. The end was near, yet still, the call for aid went out. Again and again, the Talari broadcast their plea, hoping that anyone would hear. The broadcast described their suffering in plain words. Stripped of pride, we have no strength left. Our fleets are gone. Our skies burn with enemy. Fire, please. If there is a power greater than the Krylok, we beg you, hear us. The silence that followed was worse than the explosions outside. Silence meant no answer. Silence meant they were alone. Veril's voice cracked as he pressed forward, fighting back tears. We are not proud to beg, but today, pride is nothing compared to survival. If you hear this message, if you can help, we open our skies, we open our world. Save us, and you will have our eternal loyalty. His words carried across light years, past nebulae and empty voids. But who would answer? The Talari Council gathered in the underground chambers, faces drawn, eyes hollow. They whispered of legends, stories told of a race that lived on Deathworlds, planets so cruel and unforgiving that even their air seemed to kill. Beings who were shaped by endless struggle, sharpened by hardship. Beings called Deathworlders, but they were myths, half-believed tales spoken in taverns and war camps. No one had truly seen them, and if they were real, they even care. Would they help? The council argued in desperation. Some said no one would come. Some said even Deathworlders would turn their backs. Yet others clung to hope, fragile as glass. If they are real, whispered one elder, then they are our last chance. Above them, the Krillok siege grew worse. Starships blotted out the sun, raining down fire upon the cities. Towers of smoke climbed into the sky. Oceans boiled where bombs fell. Every moment stretched longer than the last. Every second a reminder that their world was slipping into the abyss. And still the call went out, broadcast after broadcast. Please, in every language, a single prayer repeated into the void. Then came the moment no one expected. In the deep silence of space, the comms officer of the Talari Defense Fleet detected movement. Not Krillok ships, no, their sensors screamed with signals unlike anything they had recorded before. Massive gravitational shifts, sudden distortions in the fabric of space. Something was coming. Panic swept through the chamber. Was it more enemies? Another fleet to finish what the Krylok had started? Or was it an answer? Veril pressed his trembling hands against the console, whispering as if the stars themselves might listen. Please, please, let it be salvation. The comms officer's eyes widened. Ships, enormous ships. They're not Krillok, they're different. Their hulls dark, scarred, powerful, and there are so many. The council froze, hearts thundered. Could this truly be them? The beings of rumor, the dwellers of Deathworlds. The silence inside the chamber was broken by the voice of the young officer, almost breathless. The Deathworlders. They've arrived. And with that, the desperate call found its answer. The alien world shook under the fury of the Krillok. Firestorms swept across broken cities. Towers that once reached proudly toward the sky now lay in twisted heaps of rubble. The air was thick with ash, and the once blue oceans boiled where orbital weapons struck. For the Talari every hour felt like the final one. They clung to life with trembling hands, even as despair hollowed their eyes. Yet among the chaos, whispers spread like sparks in the dark. The Deathworlders had arrived at first. No one dared to believe. Stories of their existence had always sounded like drunken tales, myths told in old war camps. But when the sensors revealed massive unknown ships piercing through the void, Even the most doubtful voices fell silent. These vessels were unlike anything the Clery had ever seen. Their hulls were dark, scarred by battles across countless stars. They carried no decoration, no banners, no cries of glory, only steel, function, and quiet menace. From the underground bunkers, survivors looked up to the sky. Through cracks in ruined ceilings and shattered windows, they saw shadows stretching across the heavens. The Deathworlder fleet was enormous, blotting out the light of distant suns. Engines glowed faintly, like the heartbeat of some giant predator, waiting to strike. The Krillok noticed, to their war machines, once circling with confidence, suddenly shifted formation. They sensed danger, but even they did not yet understand the storm that had come. On the Twari surface, High Speaker Veril struggled to keep calm. His voice shook as he whispered to his council, "If these are truly Deathworlders, then we must be ready. They are not known for mercy. They are known for survival, and survival rarely comes with kindness." The others nodded, but their eyes betrayed fear. Were these new arrivals allies, or another doom sent to crush them? Hours dragged. Like centuries, no message came. The Deathworlders did not answer the Twari call with words. Their comms remained silent. Their ships gave no signal of peace or war. Only the endless, waiting silence pressed down like a weight. The Krillok, emboldened by the lack of response, launched another wave of fire. Their ships streaked across the sky, raining destruction upon defenseless cities. Whole blocks of civilians were erased in seconds. The screams of the dying rose like a storm. It was then, for the first time, that the Deathworlders moved. Sensors picked up sudden shifts. Weapon ports opened across the massive fleet. Their energy signatures blazed like newborn suns. The alien defense officers stared at their screens in disbelief. The sheer power being drawn from those engines and cores was unlike anything they had ever recorded. Above the planet, the Deathworlders positioned themselves with precision, silent, deliberate, like hunters circling prey. They did not rush. They did not announce. They simply prepared, as though every movement had already been decided long before they arrived. The Krillok realized too late. Their formations broke, confusion spreading like disease. Commands barked across their channels, but fear echoed in their voices. For the first time in years of conquest, they were uncertain. From the ground, the Teleri people watched in awe. Mothers holding children peeked from bunkers. Soldiers at ruined barricades tilted their heads upward, their rifles forgotten in their hands. Everyone felt it at once, the change in the air, the shift in the balance. And then, without warning, the sky ignited. Deathworlder weapons fired in perfect unison. Blinding beams tore across the heavens, slicing through Krillok ships as though they were made of glass. Explosions blossomed in silence, one after another, until the night became brighter, then day. The Krillok fleet was shredded apart within moments, their mighty armada crumbling under the weight of Deathworlder firepower. Every shot was merciless, every strike exact. The Deathworlders did not waste energy. They did not prolong, they ended. On the surface, shock swept through the bunkers. The Tlori cheered, cried, and prayed all at once. They had begged for aid, and now here it was, delivered in fire and fury. But as the spectacle unfolded, unease lingered beneath their relief. The Deathworlders' silence was chilling. They had not come as friends, they had come as executioners. Veril leaned against the console, his voice trembling. They answered us, but not with mercy. They answered with war. The council sat in silence. There was no joy in their faces, only awe mixed with fear. They had called upon legends, and the legends had proven real. But legends were never gentle. In orbit, wreckage rained like falling stars as Krillok ships broke apart. Deathworlder vessels moved through the debris field without hesitation, scanning, hunting, erasing any survivors that dared to flee. No ship was spared. No enemy voice went unanswered. The Krillok had wanted conquest. Instead, they found annihilation. The last explosions lit the void. The Deathworlder fleet reformed in perfect silence. They hovered above the ruined planet, dark giants watching from the sky. Their message was clear without a single word. Mercy was not in their nature. Survival was their only language, and the Clery understood in that moment that they had been both saved and warned. The battlefield above the Tlori homeworld was no longer theirs. It belonged to the Deathworlders now. Wreckage of Krillok warships drifted across the void, glowing fragments tumbling slowly as if time itself had been broken. Fires still burned. In orbit, tiny suns that flickered and died in silence. To those watching from the ground, it was as if the sky had been torn open and rebuilt in fire. Yet even as the last Krillok ship split apart, the Deathworlders gave no word. Their fleet moved with cold precision, forming patterns in orbit that spoke of discipline beyond imagination. They did not broadcast victory. They did not reassure the Tlari. They did not even acknowledge the cries of relief echoing across the surface. Instead, they waited. In the bunkers beneath the cities, survivors huddled together. Their faces glowed faintly in the light of screens as they stared at the black silhouettes above. Some whispered prayers, others trembled in silence. Children asked if the monsters were gone, and parents could only nod, unsure if the greater monster was yet to reveal itself. High Speaker Veril stood among his council, staring at the feed of the Deathworlder fleet. His hands shook at his sides. "Why do they not answer us?" he asked softly, as if the stars might provide an answer. No one replied. Every council member had the same fear written on their faces. The comms officer tried again, sending out broadcast after broadcast. Pleas, greetings, offers of loyalty all vanished into the cold static of space. The Deathworlders ignored them, their silence louder than any threat. On the surface, soldiers climbed out of ruined shelters, stepping over rubble and twisted metal. They looked to the heavens, their breaths misting in the ash-filled air. For the first time, they were not staring at Krillok ships, but at something far larger and far more dangerous. The Deathworlders. One soldier muttered to another, his voice heavy with awe. "They destroyed an entire fleet in minutes. What are they?" The other shook his head slowly. "Not gods, not demons. Something worse. Survivors." Above the Deathworlder, vessels shifted again. Engines burned with low light as the massive fleet spread wider, scanning the orbit with endless patience. Smaller crafts detached, darting across the wreckage like predators sniffing out wounded prey. The Krillok survivors tried to flee, but their ships were hunted down with exact precision. No enemy would be left to return with tales of weakness. The Tlari watched all of this with frozen heart. Relief clashed with terror. These were the saviors they had begged for, yet nothing about them felt like saviors. Their silence was chilling, their efficiency terrifying. Then, without warning, the Deathworlders turned their gaze to the planet itself. The first beam of light streaked downward, cutting through the upper atmosphere and striking an abandoned Krillok landing site. The explosion rattled windows across the countryside, shattering whatever illusion of safety remained. Another beam followed, then another, each one targeting hidden bunkers and siege camps the Krillok had left behind. The ground shook as craters bloomed, cities quivered, and the people of the Tlari fell to their knees in shock. Were they being saved or punished? Veril's voice cracked as he shouted across the chamber. "They are targeting Krillok positions. Look, they know where every enemy camp lies." The council crowded around the screens, watching in disbelief, as Deathworlder precision fire annihilated the last remnants of Krillok ground forces. It was as if they had been watching the war unfold from the shadows all along, waiting for the moment to strike. The silence broke only through action. Where the Tlari had begged with words, the Deathworlders answered with fire. The alien civilians poured from shelters, standing in the ruined streets to witness the sky itself raining vengeance. Children clutched their parents, their eyes wide, as fire painted the horizon. Soldiers dropped their rifles, realizing their weapons were meaningless in comparison to this storm. Still, no words came. The Deathworlder fleet remained mute. They did not tell the Tlari to rise. They did not claim victory. They did not demand tribute. They only cleansed the battlefield with ruthless efficiency, erasing the Krillok like a stain on history. Hours passed. The bombardments slowed. The planet grew quiet again, save for the distant crackle of burning cities. The Deathworlder fleet remained above, unmoving, a silent wall of iron in the stars. Within the council chamber, the silence was unbearable. One elder finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "We called for aid. We received fire. Is this what salvation looks like?" Veril closed his eyes. The truth weighed heavy on him. Perhaps salvation has many faces, and not all of them are kind. In orbit, the Deathworlder fleet began to shift again. Their ships moved with deliberate calm, as though preparing for the next phase. Lights flickered across their hulls, weapons powering down but engines glowing brighter. The Tlari held their breath. Were the Deathworlders leaving, or would they turn their fire on the very world they had just saved? No one knew. The silence stretched on, and with it came a single chilling thought that pressed against every heart. They had begged for mercy. But mercy had not answered. Something else had. The stars above the Tlari world burned with the glow of wreckage. Shards of metal, the corpses of Krillok warships, drifted like broken teeth across the void. The Deathworlder fleet moved through this graveyard in silence, their dark hulls untouched, their formation precise as a blade. On the ground, the people watched, waiting for the sky to speak. But no voice came. High Speaker Veril stood at the command post, his eyes fixed on the feed. Hours had passed since the last Krillok ship had been destroyed, yet the Deathworlders had sent no message, no signal. The silence pressed harder than the bombardments had. Every second stretched longer, heavier. His council whispered around him, some daring to hope, others drowning in fear. The comms officer tried once more. To the fleet in orbit, "We are the Talari people. You have saved us. Please, please speak with us." His words disappeared into static. The Deathworlders gave no reply. Varel clenched his fists. "Why won't they answer?" he muttered, his voice cracking. But no one had an answer. In the ruined streets above, soldiers and civilians climbed from the shelters. They tilted their heads skyward, their faces pale in the glow of the fleet. Some wept openly, praising their saviors. Others trembled, unable to shake the fear that perhaps these giants had come for more than battle. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves, asking if the Deathworlders were friends. None of the parents dared to say yes. The Deathworlders had fought with a fury that no one had ever seen, but their silence carried a message of its own, a message no one could yet understand. In orbit, the massive ships shifted again. Engines flared as they adjusted position, spreading wider, surrounding the planet like wolves around wounded prey. Smaller vessels detached, darting through the upper atmosphere. They scanned cities, mountain ranges, oceans. Their presence felt invasive, like unseen eyes searching every corner. Fear began to spread among the survivors. What if the Deathworlders had come not to save, but to judge? What if the destruction of the Krillok was only the beginning? One of the council members leaned close to Veril. "Perhaps we were wrong to call for them. Perhaps they do not give aid, they give only war." Veril's lips tightened, his thoughts heavy. The Deathworlders had answered the call, yes, but what was their price? The night deepened, and the silence grew unbearable. The fleet hung above them, unmoving but alive, each ship a dark promise. Finally, the ground shook again. A beam of light speared downward, striking not a Krylok target this time, but a stretch of uninhabited desert. The explosion carved a crater miles wide, the shockwave rattling cities half a world away. Panic erupted. Civilians screamed, believing the attack had begun. Families rushed back to bunkers. Soldiers raised weapons, though they knew they were useless. Even the council leaped to their feet in terror. But then another strike followed, this time obliterating a Krillok stronghold hidden beneath the sands. The Deathworlders had not turned against the Tlari. They were finishing what the Krillok had started. Veril watched the feed as more beams fell, each one targeted with terrifying accuracy. Abandoned enemy bases, hidden supply caches, concealed bunkers, all erased in bursts of fire. Not a single shot missed. The Krillok were being hunted even in death. The realization spread slowly among the Talari. They were not the targets. Not yet. But the Deathworlders had chosen silence over words. Their actions spoke in fire, and their fire was absolute. Above, the fleet grew brighter as weapons dimmed and engines roared. The wreckage of the Krillok fleet was being cleared away. Drones swarmed through the debris, pulling twisted remains into fiery orbits, erasing the evidence of battle. It was not mercy, it was not kindness, it was efficiency. The Deathworlders left nothing behind. Veril felt his chest tighten. He had asked for salvation. What he had received was something else, something larger, colder, unstoppable. He wondered if the Tlari were now chained to this power, bound forever by the fire that had spared them. Hours passed. The sky remained full of shadows. The fleet did not leave, but neither did it attack. It simply watched. The silence was not empty now. It was a weight pressing on every heart. It was the knowledge that the Deathworlders chose not to speak because they did not need to. Their presence was enough. In the bunkers, children whispered to one another, imagining monsters with steel skin and burning eyes. In the cities, soldiers spoke quietly, their words sharp with fear, and in the council chambers, the elders debated, in hushed voices, none daring to speak too loudly, as if afraid the Deathworlders might hear. Veril stood apart, staring at the stars. He knew the truth that none wished to admit. The Krillok had been a terror, yes, but the Deathworlders were something greater. They were not saviors. They were survival given form, survival sharpened into a blade, and blades did not know mercy. The sky burned again. For a long time, the Deathworlders had been silent, circling the planet like predators that had already chosen their prey. The Talari thought perhaps the storm was over, that maybe the hunters would leave after finishing their grim work. But then the silence shattered. Without warning, the Deathworlder fleet erupted into motion. Engines roared, weapons came alive, and beams of searing light cut through the void. It was as if the heavens themselves had split open, spilling fury. Across the stars, every eye on the planet turned upward in awe and terror. The wreckage of the Krillok fleet was still drifting, glowing like broken embers. Now it was being torn apart completely. Deathworlder cannons fired again and again, smashing what little remained of their enemy into dust. Escape pods were vaporized before they could blink away. Survivors were hunted with merciless precision. There was no hesitation, no pause. From the ground, it looked like a second sun had risen. The night became bright with fire, and the world shook with distant echoes of explosions. Civilians screamed, some in fear, others in wild relief. Soldiers clutched their weapons to their chests, knowing they were useless, but holding them anyway, as if steel alone could keep them steady. Inside the council chamber, Veril and his advisors stared at the feeds. None of them spoke. What words could describe the sight of an entire armada being erased as though it had never existed? What words could capture the truth that even the mightiest conquerors of the galaxy were nothing before this storm? The Krillok tried to fight. A handful of their ships rallied, charging at the Deathworlders in desperation. But it was like insects throwing themselves against a mountain. Their weapons glanced harmlessly off hardened armor, their formations shattered before they even had time to form. In seconds, those who dared to resist were nothing but ashes drifting in silence. The Deathworlders pressed on, their firepower never slowing. Their fleet moved with impossible coordination, every strike exact, every volley devastating. It was not battle, it was execution. The Talari civilians huddled in bunkers, their screens lighting their pale faces. Children whimpered at the noise, their small hands pressed to their ears. Parents whispered reassurances they didn't believe themselves. They were safe from the Krillok, yes, but watching the Deathworlders fight filled them with a different kind of fear, deeper and colder. On the horizon, Deathworlder strikes scorched the land where Krillok forces had left hidden fortresses. Entire mountain ranges shook, craters bloomed across deserts, and seas boiled where weapons struck. It seemed the Deathworlders knew every secret base, every hidden camp, every shadow where the Krillok had once rested. Nothing escaped them. Veril's voice was barely a whisper. They see everything. The council turned to him, their eyes wide. None disagreed. These were not saviors who stumbled into the fight. These were predators who already knew the battlefield, who had studied every corner of it before deciding to strike. Hours dragged on, the bombardments never ceased. It was as if the Deathworlders were not only fighting the Krillok but cleansing the very memory of them. The Talari world trembled under the storm, the ground shaking, the skies alight. Finally, the last Krillok vessel exploded, shattering into fragments that burned across the atmosphere like falling stars. The fleet slowed, engines dimming, weapons falling silent, but the silence was worse than the thunder. The Deathworlders did not cheer, did not broadcast victory. They hung in the sky, massive and dark, their presence heavy on every heart below. The people waited for a word, a message, anything, but none came. In the streets, a soldier whispered to his comrade, his voice shaking, "They saved us." The other shook his head, his eyes fixed on the sky. "No, they destroyed our enemy. That is not the same thing." In the council chamber, one of the elders broke the silence. "Do you see what this means? The Deathworlders do not fight for others, they fight because it is in their nature. We begged for mercy, and they answered in the only language they know." Veril's hands trembled as he pressed them to the table. His mind swam with fear and gratitude, tangled into one. The Deathworlders had saved their world, but they had done it with such ruthless violence that it no longer felt like salvation. It felt like judgment. Above, the Deathworlder fleet remained, unmoving, a black crown against the stars. The fires on the surface smoldered, smoke curling into the night. Every Twari heart beat with the same unspoken question. Would the Deathworlders stay? And if they stayed, what would they demand? The Krillok had been monsters, but the Death was something greater, something far more terrifying. They had not brought peace. They had brought survival carved out of the flesh of their enemies. And as the silence stretched, the people of the Talari began to understand, had called for aid, and aid had come, but aid had not worn the face of mercy. It had worn the face of fire. The world was quiet, but it was not peace. Smoke rose from shattered cities, drifting slowly into the night sky. Fires burned in the ruins where once families had lived, where once children had played. The people of the Talari crept from their shelters, stepping carefully into the broken streets. Their eyes turned upward, always upward, to the dark silhouettes of the fleet that still hung above them. The Deathworlders had not left. They lingered in orbit, their ships silent, massive shadows waiting in the stars. No voice came, no message of comfort, no explanation of what came next. Just the endless weight of their presence pressing down on the planet below. High Speaker Veril stood at the heart of the council chamber, his hands resting on the edge of the console. He had not slept in days. His face was pale, his eyes heavy, but still he stared at the fleet above. "They are not gone," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "They are watching," one of the elders answered with a trembling voice. "Perhaps they wait for tribute. Perhaps they expect payment for what they have done." Another shook his head. "No, look at them. They do not circle like merchants. They hold position like predators. They have not asked for anything because they already took everything they wanted." The words sent a shiver through the chamber. Thought back to the first stories he had heard as a child, legends of the Deathworlders told in whispers around campfires. A race forged in the harshest places, on planets so cruel that most life could not survive. Worlds of fire, ice, poison, storms, predators, deathworlds, and from those worlds came humans, the Deathworlders themselves, not shaped by kindness, not tempered by peace, but hardened by endless struggle until survival became their very nature. Now, he saw the truth of those stories. The Deathworlders did not save because of mercy. They destroyed because of necessity. To them, survival was not just instinct, it was law. And mercy, in their law, was weakness. On the surface, soldiers gathered in the ruins, staring upward in silence. They whispered to each other about what they had seen. The Krillok had been monsters, feared across the stars, yet the Deathworlders had torn them apart as if they were nothing. One soldier muttered, "We begged them for aid, and they answered with annihilation. What does that make us now? Survivors or witnesses?" In the streets, civilians tried to rebuild, though their hands shook with every noise from the sky. They were grateful, yes, but gratitude mixed with dread. For the first time, they realized they were living under the gaze of something greater than terror. Above, the Deathworlder fleet moved again. Engines flared as massive ships repositioned, their lights glinting like the eyes of beasts in the dark. Smaller craft streaked through the skies, sweeping low across the planet. They did not attack, but they did not hide. They flew over ruined cities, scanning with beams of pale light, their shadows stretching across rooftops and broken roads. It was as though the entire planet had become their territory, and the Talari merely existed within it. Viril's comms officer reported softly, "They have not spoken, but they see everything. Their scans reach every city, every outpost. They know more of our world now than even we do." The council murmured in unease. Were they allies or masters? At dawn, the Deathworlders struck again, not at the Talari, but at the last remnants of the Krillok. Hidden camps in the deep forests erupted into flames. Secret underwater bases boiled into the sea. Even orbital stations thought abandoned were found and destroyed. The Deathworlders missed nothing. They hunted with precision beyond reason, clearing every trace of their enemy. The people watched in silence. No cheer rose. No celebration followed. There was only awe and fear. Veril finally spoke what many had begun to feel. "This is not mercy. This is a lesson." The chamber fell still. Every council member stared at him. He lifted his gaze to the fleet in orbit, his voice heavy. "The Deathworlders do not show kindness, they show truth. They remind us that in the galaxy, survival does not belong to the weak. It belongs to those willing to answer with fire." That is their lesson. That is their warning. No one argued, because deep in their hearts, they all felt it too. As night fell again, the fleet loomed silently in the sky, watching but never speaking. Children in the bunkers whispered that the Deathworlders had eyes that could see inside your thoughts, that they could smell fear like smoke. Parents hushed them, but their own hearts believed the same. The Krillok were gone. The planet was safe for now, but safety had come wrapped in fire and shadow. The Talari realized they had not been saved. They had been shown what true power looked like, and in that power, there was no mercy, only survival. The war was over. The Krillok were gone, burned from the skies. Their fleets reduced to drifting ash. Yet the air on the Talari world was heavy, thick with smoke and fear. Streets lay in ruins, towers broken, oceans scarred. Survivors walked through the wreckage with hollow eyes, carrying the weight of both victory and uncertainty. Above them, the Deathworlders remained. Their fleet hung like black mountains in the sky, silent and unmoving. No message came, no promise of alliance, no words of reassurance. The people had begged for help, and they had been answered, but not with mercy. They had been answered with fire. High Speaker Veril stood among the ruins of the capital, his robes tattered, his face drawn from sleepless nights. Around him, soldiers and council members gathered, waiting for guidance, but even he, the voice of his people, did not know what to say. His eyes stayed locked on the heavens, where the Deathworlders watched. "They saved us," one elder whispered. "We would be dead without them." Another shook his head slowly. "No, they saved no one. They destroyed our enemy." "That is not the same thing." Veril said nothing. In his heart he knew the truth. The Deathworlders had not come for the Tlari, they had come for the and in destroying them, the Tlari had been caught in the storm. In the streets, children pointed to the sky, their voices a mix of awe and fear. Some called the Deathworlders angels, others called them demons. Parents could not give answers. How could they explain creatures that looked like salvation but fought like extinction? Days passed, the Deathworlder fleet never moved, never spoke. Smaller ships continued to sweep across the planet, scanning ruins, searching the seas, piercing mountains with sensors that hummed in the night. They found every scrap of Krillok technology and destroyed it without hesitation. The message was clear. Nothing of the enemy would remain. At night, the people gathered in the shelters, whispering about what would happen next. Would the Deathworlders turn their fire on them? Would they leave? Or would they stay forever? Guardians? Or masters? No one could say. Veril returned to the council chamber. Its roof half collapsed, dust drifting through beams of pale light. His voice was low but steady. "We have seen the truth. We begged for mercy, but mercy did not answer. The Deathworlders showed us what it means to survive, and survival is not gentle. It is not kind. It is fire." The council sat in silence. Every member knew his words were true. Then, for the first time since their arrival, the Deathworlders moved. The fleet shifted in perfect unison, a wall of steel pulling away from orbit. Engines flared brighter, glowing like suns as the massive ships prepared to leave. The people rushed into the streets, staring at the sky. Hearts pounded. Was this it? Would the Deathworlders depart without a word, leaving nothing but the memory of fire behind them? The answer came not as a voice, but as a final act. A single ship broke formation, descending lower into the atmosphere. Its shadow passed across the capital, blotting out the sun. For a moment, terror gripped the Tlari. Then the ship fired a beam into the ruins of a Krillok war camp. The explosion lit the horizon, destroying the last trace of their enemy, and then, as silently as they had come, the fleet turned toward the stars. Engines thundered, leaving trails of light across the void. One by one, the Deathworlders vanished into hyperspace, swallowed by the darkness. Within minutes, the sky was empty again. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence of realization. The Tlari were alive. Their world was broken, but it still turned beneath the stars. They had been given another chance. Veril stood on the balcony of the council chamber, his eyes on the horizon. His voice was quiet, but it carried to those near him. "They did not save us out of kindness. They saved us because that is who they are. They do not forgive. They do not show mercy. They survive. And in their survival, we too remain." The word spread through the people like a shadow. Some felt gratitude. Some felt dread. All felt the weight of the lesson. Children would grow up hearing the story of the day the Deathworlders came. Parents would tell them how the sky burned, how the monsters that ruled the galaxy were erased in moments, and how humanity beings from worlds of fire and poison showed the galaxy what survival truly meant. The Tlari would rebuild. The cities would rise again, but none of them would ever forget the fleet that answered their call. For when the Tlari pleaded for aid, it was not mercy that came. It was the firepower of Deathworlders, and in that fire they learned the truth. Mercy is fleeting. Survival is forever.